everyone, today we're going to go through my 2023 plant haul. First up is the Whipple Way Philodendron. This plant in the last couple years has come down significantly in price. It was in the multiple thousands of dollars, and now it's beneath $1,000 here in 2023 in California. As you can see from the coloring, it's a very beautiful plant, and that's what attracted me to this plant. It actually grows pretty quickly. The leaves come out with like a burgundy pink rose color, kind of begin to fade almost like a Florida ghost does, and it actually adds a little bit of green into the leaf as they age. They seem to be fairly pest resistant by having a little bit of a thicker cuticle on the leaf and should be relatively easy to care for like other philodendrons. Next up is Philodendron Bipennifolium variegata. Now this plant kind of looks like Florida Beauty in juvenile style. It tends to have the singular lobe here and that same style of like aurea-like variegation. The coloring and really the stability of variegation, it seems, is what drew me to this plant. This plant has kind of remained stable in price, and I'm kind of seeing that will happen again this year also. Care should be similar to the Florida Beauty and also the Florida Ghost. Be careful about where you cut this plant because it likely has the possibility of going all green or all yellow, and you want to watch out for that. But also seems fairly pest resistant like the Beauty, has a little bit of a thicker leaf, and should be a strong plant for 2023. Next up we have the Philodendron wend-imbe variegata. This is a super interesting plant in that it grows very vigorously from multiple growth points. It's a very bushy plant. But then through some of the growth points, you get these half moon leaves. It's a very beautiful plant with a long lobe, singular lobe on the leaf. It kind of has like spiritus-like leaves in that they're very long and have a good long leaf stem. It creates a very full and bushy plant. It also has a waxy leaf, so that tells me that it's likely pest resistant, as are many of the philodendrons, with the exception of the fuzzy leaf philodendron. Also be careful of cutting this plant back because we do have some sport green leaves coming out of here, and we know that this plant has the ability to produce variegation, so just be cognizant of that when you're cutting it. Last year, this plant was kind of in the mid 400s here in the US, and we'll see where it settles this year. Next up is something I've finally gotten my hands on. We've been looking for this plant for a long time. I know a lot of you have. This is the Philodendron Spiritus SANCTI. I haven't seen one of these plants in person until now, and I'm starting to really see the allure. It actually grows quite fast and seems to be pretty easy to take care of in terms of humidity. We've got it running at about 70% humidity in here and at about 85 degrees Fahrenheit. It puts out these very long petioles along the stem and then puts out a very delicate leaf that really starts in like a sagey green color and then darkens over time. At maturity, the Spiritus SANCTI is a true stunner, and I think this is going to be a very popular plant now that it's beneath $1,000, and years back in 2020, this plant went for above $10,000. As we talked about before, this plant was actually being stolen from greenhouses and botanical gardens across the world. Next up is something that looks like the Pink Princess, but it is not. This is the Red Anderson Philodendron. This is a white knight crossed with a Pink Princess, and you can tell that because the marbling that occurs in the leaves, as well as the white pinkish striping that goes up the leaf stems on this plant. And that is much like the white knight. So from the white knight, you get the leaf striping, and then of course, you get a little bit of the pinking. It turns out to be a bit of a paler pink, so it's a nice blend between Pink Princess and White Knight. Just for contrast, this is a Pink Princess Philodendron. It's new from this haul, but you can see really the hard pinking on this plant, the lack of striping on the stem, whereas this plant is a bit of a paler pink-white, and it does have that striping going up the leaf stems. Red Anderson has been quite expensive in the last couple of years, ranging from kind of $300 to $1,000, depending on the size of the plant, and I could kind of see that trend continuing depending on if this plant goes to tissue culture. But if it is heavily produced in tissue culture, I could see this plant coming down into the low few hundreds of dollars, but you should be able to treat it like a White Knight or a Pink Princess, fairly pest resistant, pretty easy with humidity around 60% and about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, next up, we got ourselves a Glorious. This is a true Glorious. A few years back, we actually sold a very large Glorious that turned out to be a Splendid. So if we've made a video a few years back talking about that plant, that was our mistake. We were sold the wrong plant. But you can really see the form and combination of Gloriosum in this stemming with a combination of that Melanochrysum, which creates a smaller leaf, a much more slender leaf than the large form of the Gloriosum. With these fuzzy leaf philodendrons, you want to watch out for pests because spider mites love these plants, and you want to keep your humidity really north of 70%. It's quite a beautiful plant, and it's kind of hard to find. It's mostly produced through cuttings, but I do believe this plant could be tissue cultured, and it should range between $50 and $125. I think the price on this will remain stable. Next up are unique varieties of the Monstera adansonii variegata. These are not simply just adansonii albos. First up, we have the archipelago. This plant is characterized by having a few of the different colors of albo, but also having this bright white, kind of like the Florida ghost, come out initially, and then the leaves kind of fade into a minty color. Getting a little closer here, you can see some of the different colors, many times the 3 different colors that are within this leaf. It's a very minty plant and has dark greens, more of a white, and then a limier green. And then we have the European mint adansonii. This is a really beautiful plant, and if you don't know what you have, you could miss it. When this plant doesn't get a lot of light, it just looks like a regular adansonii. But as you give the plant adequate light, it starts to produce very bright white leaves that then fade into a limier green over time. Here's more of a minty variety of that plant also. It's showing a lot more of the mint coloring that other Monsteras have also. Next up, we have the Monstera Peru aurea variegata. This is a very beautiful plant and seems to be a very sturdy plant. It's really surfaced only in the last couple of years and has been pretty stable in price between about $200 and $800 depending on the size of the plant and the variegation. I really adore this plant for having the yellow variegation in contrast with that dark green of the Monstera Peru. It really makes for a great contrast. And like most Monsteras, it's very pest resistant by having that thick shell-like leaf that kind of looks like a luxurians when you look at the texture up close. The variegation seems slightly unstable, so be careful with where you cut this plant, but this plant should be a good bet for 2023. Next up is a plant that's been on my wish list for a very long time, and I'm super excited to have finally got my hands on it. It is the Rhaphidophora tetrasperma variegata. Now, if you're like most of us, you've got yourselves a Rhaphidophora tetrasperma at some point, and that plant is absolutely going wild. Now, to put some half mooning and variegation through that strong, stable plant seems like the perfect plant. And honestly, in having this plant about 2 or 3 weeks, it's already put out a new shoot here, and this plant's also putting out a new shoot here. So they seem to be growing well, and we know the Rhaphidophora, the mini Monstera, is quite pest resistant also. It's likely a heavy feeder, so it's going to be a fan of all the fertilizer you can throw at it, as well as all the light you can throw at it. I would treat this kind of like a deliciosa, but just watch out for that aurea-like variegation to brown off. If you don't have this plant under grow lights, it's possible that this plant will drop leaves as opposed to if you have it under adequate light. And also make sure to keep up with that fertilizing because this plant will harvest its lowest leaves to provide for the top newest growth. But super excited to have a variegated Rhaphidophora tetrasperma. It looks like 2 slightly different varieties of variegation here. Can't wait to see this plant vine up and grow larger. Next up, we have an Alocasia frydek. I've been trying to get my hands on one of these plants for a while. I've started one from tissue, but I ended up losing it to being far too white in the leaves. This plant is just getting reestablished. We finally have 1 root coming out here, and we're in a mix of stratum and perlite. You do need to be careful of humidity with this plant. I'd really say above 75 to 80% humidity, and watch out for spider mites and really every other bug. Alocasias are notorious for just being magnets to spider mites and other bugs. Also, it's very common that the lower leaves prune off, and that this plant really only sustains maybe 3 to 5 leaves at max while it grows larger and larger. So it will cut off the lower leaves as it grows. Very excited, but also nervous to have this frydek in-house. She has some of the most gorgeous variegation, but it can go all whites or all greens, so be cognizant of that. And finally, we have the variegated Musa. This is a banana tree that will actually grow variegated fruit, and I just had to show you guys how well it's doing being in LECA. We have roots coming out of the bottom here, and this leaf, we measured it yesterday, is about 14 inches tall from the base of the LECA to the top of the leaf. Starting to get very wide leaves, but be careful with humidity, needing to keep it above about 70%, and it really likes the warmth and lots of food. So thank you guys so much for watching this week's video. If you did enjoy the video or learn something new, please click the like button down below. It helps us out so much. And come back every Saturday for a new video about houseplants. Have a good day.